Struggling fisherman helped woman fix her boat, unaware she's billionaire, searching for honest man. On a weathered dock in a small coastal town, a struggling fisherman notices a woman battling with her broken boat. Without a second thought, he steps in to help, his calloused hands working with the skill and patience earned from years at sea. To him, she's just another soul in need, but she's far from ordinary. Behind her simple attire and quiet demeanor lies a secret. She's a billionaire, on an unusual mission, searching for a man who values honesty over wealth. As she immerses herself in his humble world, she discovers something her fortune could never buy: pure, genuine kindness and a life stripped down to what truly matters. But when her true identity surfaces, will it bridge their worlds together or prove that some gaps are too wide to cross? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The salty breeze carried the first hints of dawn across Millport Harbor as Jack Morrison's weathered boots struck the creaking wooden planks of his dock. At 32, his face already bore the gentle weathering of a man who'd spent his life facing the sea's harsh embrace. The morning light revealed the peeling paint on his small fishing boat, Grace, named after his late father's favorite word for everything beautiful in life. Jack checked his wallet one more time. The thin leather folder containing exactly $23 and a crumpled receipt from his mother's pharmacy. The medication costs had nearly doubled this month, but he'd never let her know how much it worried him. Instead, he'd just wake up earlier, work longer, and somehow make it work. He always did. "Morning, Jack," old Tom called from his pristine. "Charter boat 2 slips down. Heard the tuna are running near the Outer Banks." "Thanks, Tom," Jack replied, managing a smile, despite knowing his boat couldn't safely make it that far anymore. The engine needed repairs he couldn't afford, limiting him to the closer, overfished waters, where catches were becoming increasingly rare. As he loaded his gear, his hands moved with the automatic precision of someone who'd been doing this since childhood. His father had taught him everything about fishing, about maintaining boats, about reading the water's mood. "The sea provides," his father used to say, "but only to those who respect her." Those words echoed in his mind as he untied his lines. The morning sun finally breaking through the clouds, the other boats in the harbor told the story of Millport's changing times. Gleaming pleasure craft and luxury yachts increasingly occupied the slips where working fishing boats once dominated. Tourism was the future, everyone said, but Jack couldn't imagine being anything other than what he was, a fisherman like his father before him. He guided Grace past the harbor's mouth, where the water darkened to a deep blue. A pair of dolphins surfaced nearby, their appearance bringing a genuine smile to his face. No matter how tough things got, moments like these reminded him why he loved this life. 3 hours later, his nets came up light again. Jack sighed, checking his fuel gauge. He could afford one more attempt before heading back, or he'd risk not having enough gas for tomorrow. As he prepared to try a different spot, he noticed another boat approaching in the distance, its engine sputtering in a way that made his experienced ear prick up with concern. That's when he saw her for the first time, though he didn't know then how this moment would change everything. A woman stood at the helm of the struggling vessel, her long dark hair whipping in the wind as she tried to manage the failing engine. Without hesitation, Jack turned Grace toward the boat in distress, his father's other favorite saying coming. "Do mind, the richest man is the one who can afford to help others." Little did he know just how ironic those words would prove to be. By the time he returned to port that evening, his coolers were nearly empty, but he'd helped 3 different boats with minor repairs. He'd refused payment from all of them, even though he knew he'd have to skip dinner again to make up for the lost fishing time. The dockmaster, Mike, watched him tie up with knowing eyes. "You can't fix everyone's problems, Jack," Mike called out, his voice gentle but concerned. Jack secured his last line before responding. Maybe not, but I can fix their boats. He managed a grin, though his stomach was already growling. As he walked home in the gathering dusk, past the small shops closing for the day and the tourists enjoying their expensive seafood dinners, Jack's mind wandered to his mother's medical bills piling up on their kitchen table. He'd need a miracle to make next month's payments. But he pushed the thought aside. Tomorrow would be better. It had to be. He just didn't know yet that tomorrow would bring him face to face with the mysterious woman from the harbor again, and with it, a chance that would test everything he believed about wealth, worth, and what it truly means to be rich. The floor-to-ceiling windows of Bennett Enterprises' executive boardroom offered a commanding view of Manhattan's skyline, but Sarah Bennett's attention was fixed on the shocked faces of her board members. She'd just announced her intention to take a 6-month sabbatical, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the marble conference table between them. "With all due respect, Ms. Bennett," Charles Whitney, her CFO, cleared his throat. "The timing seems problematic." His perfectly tailored suit couldn't hide his discomfort. "The Morgan merger will proceed as planned," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had helped build her father's company into a global empire. At 35, she doubled the company's value in just 5 years as CEO. "I've personally overseen every detail. The wheels are in motion." She stood, smoothing her Chanel dress as she walked to the window. Below, her city sparkled like a jewelry box, filled with promises that had started to feel hollow. Her reflection showed a woman who looked every bit the corporate success story. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, not a hair out of place. Yet her eyes held a weariness that no amount of luxury spa treatments could erase. "The truth is," she turned back to face her board, "I need this." After Richard, she didn't need to finish. Everyone knew about her ex-fiancé's attempted corporate espionage, how he'd nearly succeeded in stealing company secrets along with her heart. Linda Martinez, the only other woman on the board, spoke up. "Take the time, Sarah. You've earned it." A knowing look passed between them. Linda had warned her about Richard months before the truth came out. Back in her penthouse that evening, Sarah kicked off her Louboutins and poured herself a glass of wine that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. Her assistant, James, was updating her on final preparations. "The house in the Hamptons is ready," he said, scrolling through his tablet. "Or there's the villa in—" "No!" Sarah cut him off. "Something smaller. Something real." She walked to her closet, past rows of designer dresses to a section she rarely touched. "I want to disappear somewhere nobody knows the Bennett name." James looked concerned. "The board's right about the timing. And after Richard—" "This isn't about Richard," she said, though they both knew it partly was. Richard had been the third man in 5 years to approach her for her money rather than her heart. "It's about finding out who I am without all this." She gestured to the opulent room around her. "I've found a small coastal town," James said reluctantly, pulling up details on his tablet. "Millport. It's quiet. Primarily a fishing community. I can have a luxury rental—" "No luxuries," Sarah insisted, pulling out a pair of jeans she couldn't remember wearing. "I want to understand how the other half lives." "The other 99%, you mean?" James muttered, but he was already making arrangements. 2 days later, Sarah stood in front of a mirror in a modest rental cottage in Millport, hardly recognizing herself. Gone were the designer labels and perfect makeup. She wore simple jeans, a plain sweater, and boots that were chosen for function rather than fashion. Her long, dark hair fell naturally around her shoulders instead of being styled into its usual, sophisticated waves. "The boat's been arranged as requested," James informed her, looking uncomfortable in his own attempt at casual clothes. "Though I still don't understand why you want one with engine troubles." Sarah smiled, thinking of her father. Despite building a financial empire, he'd always said true character shows in how people treat those in need. "The best way to know someone's heart is to need their help," she quoted, remembering his words. "And if you find someone genuine," James asked, "someone who passes your test?" What then? Sarah stared out at the harbor, where fishing boats were returning with their day's catch. Then maybe I'll finally find something real in a world that's always felt artificial. She picked up her bag, ready to begin her experiment. No one out. There knows I could buy this entire town without denting my portfolio. For the first time in my life, people will see me for me. As she walked down to the docks, the salt air felt different here than it did on her yacht in the Mediterranean. It felt authentic, unfiltered by wealth and pretense. She spotted a weathered fishing boat pulling in, its captain's skilled hands working the ropes with practiced ease. Something about his movements, the quiet confidence of someone who knew their place in the world, caught her attention. Little did she know that tomorrow, when her carefully orchestrated boat trouble would bring them together, those same hands would offer help without any knowledge of her wealth, and begin a story that would challenge everything she believed about love, worth, and the true meaning of wealth. Morning sunlight danced across the harbor as Sarah stood on her boat, pretending to struggle with the engine compartment. James had done his job well. The problem he'd created was significant enough to need help, but not serious enough to be dangerous. She glanced around the dock, spotting the fisherman she'd noticed yesterday approaching his vessel. Jack was reviewing his mental checklist for the day when he heard the distinct sound of someone struggling with an engine. His eyes found the source. A woman bent over an open compartment of a modest fishing boat, frustration evident in her posture. Without thinking, he changed course. "Need a hand?" he called out, already noting the telltale signs of a failing fuel line from the way the engine had sputtered earlier. Sarah straightened up, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Up close, she was struck by the genuine concern in his eyes. Not the polished, practiced concern she was used to from her corporate world, but something real and unfiltered. "I can't seem to figure out what's wrong," she said, stepping back to make room for him. "I'm Sarah, by the way." "Jack Morrison," he replied, already focused on the engine. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking connections and pressure. "Points. Looks like your fuel line's got a problem. I can fix it, but it'll take about an hour." Sarah watched him work, noticing the care in his movements, despite the worn state of his clothes. "I really appreciate this. I can pay you for—" "No need." Jack cut her off, reaching for his toolbox. "We help each other out here. That's just how it works." The simplicity of his statement caught her off guard. In her world, everything had a price tag, every action an agenda. Here was someone offering help simply because it was needed. As Jack worked, Sarah found herself drawn into conversation with him. He explained what he was doing in simple terms, his passion for boats evident in every word. She learned about the local fishing spots, the changing tides of the industry, and the community that called this harbor home. "You're not from around here," he observed, wiping his hands on a rag. "It wasn't a question." "That obvious?" Sarah smiled, conscious of maintaining her cover story. "I needed a change. Thought I'd try my hand at something different." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The sea has a way of helping people find what they're looking for." He paused, then added, "even if it's not what they expected to find." A comfortable silence fell between them as he finished the repairs. Sarah noticed how the other fishermen greeted Jack as they passed, the respect in their voices unmistakable. This was a man who'd earned his place in this community through actions rather than assets. "All set," Jack announced, closing the engine compartment. "Try it now." Sarah turned the key, and the engine purred to life, running smoother than it had even before James's manufactured problem. "Thank you," she said, meaning it more than he could know. "I don't suppose, would you be willing to teach me more? About boats, I mean. I'd pay for lessons." Jack hesitated, and Sarah saw him wrestling with pride and practicality. "Tell you what?" he finally said. "You can join me on some fishing runs. Learn by doing. No charge, but an extra pair of hands is always useful." The genuine smile that spread across his face made something flutter in Sarah's chest, something that had nothing to do with her carefully planned experiment and everything to do with the unexpected warmth in his eyes. as she watched him walk. Back to his own boat, Sarah felt a twinge of guilt about her deception. She'd come here looking for proof that genuine people still existed, but she hadn't expected to find someone whose authenticity made her question her own. From his boat, Jack found himself glancing back at the mysterious newcomer. There was something about her, a mix of determination and vulnerability that intrigued him. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the day ahead. He had nets to check and bills to pay. He couldn't afford distractions, no matter how intriguing they might be. Neither of them realized that this simple interaction on a weathered dock would set in motion events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about worth, trust, and the true value of a person's character. The morning stretched into afternoon as Jack worked on Sarah's boat. What had started as a simple fuel line fix revealed other minor issues that his experienced eye couldn't ignore. Each time he discovered something new, he explained it to her, with a patience that made complex mechanics seem simple. "See this gasket here?" He pointed to a worn rubber ring. "It's starting to crack. Give it another week, and you'd have had real problems." His hands moved with practiced precision as he replaced the part with one from his personal supply. Sarah watched him intently, genuinely fascinated by the quiet confidence in his movements. In her boardroom, confidence came dressed in designer suits and practice presentations. Here it lived in calloused hands and quiet competence. "You carry spare parts with you?" she asked, noting his well-organized toolbox. Jack's laugh held a hint of self-deprecation. "Can't afford not to. My own boat's held together with spare parts and stubborn hope these days." He immediately seemed to regret the admission, focusing more intently on his work. "What about the maritime repair services in town?" Sarah asked, thinking of the gleaming repair shop she'd passed on her way to the dock. "Anderson's?" Jack shook his head. "They cater to the yacht crowd now. Regular fishermen can't afford their rates anymore." There was no bitterness in his voice, just statement of fact. A comfortable silence fell between them as he worked, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the dock and distant calls of seagulls. Sarah found herself studying his face, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the slight smile when something clicked into place just right. "All finished," he finally announced, wiping his hands on a rag. "Should run better than new now." Sarah reached for her wallet. "Please, let me pay you something, for the parts at least." "No." His response was firm but gentle. "We take care of each other here. That's worth more than money." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Though if you're serious about those fishing lessons, I could use a hand tomorrow. Early start, dawn if you can handle it." Sarah found herself nodding before she could think better of it. "Dawn it is." As Jack gathered his tools, a group of local fishermen passed by, sending knowing looks their way. "Jackie boy's got himself a student," one called out teasingly. Jack's ears reddened slightly, but he took the teasing good-naturedly. "Better than having Bill as a student, Tom. Remember when he nearly sank your boat trying to tie a knot?" The men's laughter carried across the water, and Sarah felt a strange warmth in her chest. This was the kind of easy camaraderie that no amount of networking events could manufacture. "Don't let him work you too hard," Tom advised Sarah with a wink. "He forgets not everyone was born with seawater in their veins." After they left, Jack turned to Sarah with an apologetic look. "Small town. Everyone knows everyone's business." "It's nice," Sarah said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "Where I'm from, people don't connect like this." Something in her tone made Jack look at her more closely, but he didn't pry. Instead, he simply said, "Well, you're here now. That's what matters." As he walked away, Sarah found herself staring at his retreating figure, her carefully planned experiment suddenly feeling far more complicated than she'd anticipated. She pulled out her phone to text James, then stopped herself. For the first time in years, she didn't want to analyze or strategize. She just wanted to see what tomorrow would bring. Back on his boat, Jack found himself whistling as he prepared his gear for the next day. He told himself it was just the satisfaction of a job well done, of helping someone in need. But part of him knew there was something more to it. Something about the way Sarah looked at him, like what he was saying actually mattered, not just how much it cost. Neither of them slept much that night, both watching the clock tick toward dawn, both telling themselves this was just about boats and fishing lessons, both knowing somewhere deep down that they were already in waters far deeper than either had planned to navigate. Later that evening, Sarah sat in her modest rental cottage, her laptop open to a video call with James. The contrast between her simple surroundings and her assistant's luxurious office backdrop couldn't have been starker. The Beijing investors are getting nervous, James reported, his face tight with concern. They're asking for personal assurances from you about the merger. Sarah absently twisted a strand of hair, her mind still on the dock and Jack's gentle teaching manner. Handle it, James. That's why I pay you 3 times what most CEOs pay their assistants. Sarah, James leaned closer to the camera, lowering his voice. Someone's going to recognize you eventually. Millport may be small, but people have internet. One photo, one social media post. I need more time. She cut him off, then softened her tone. There's something real here, James. Something genuine I haven't found anywhere else. You mean someone genuine? James corrected, raising an eyebrow. The Fisherman? Before Sarah could respond, a notification popped up on her screen. Another urgent message from the board. She closed it without reading. Just keep things running for a few more weeks, please. After ending the call, Sarah walked to her window, watching the harbor lights twinkle in the distance. The weight of her deception felt heavier than ever. Meanwhile, at the local pub, the Rusty Anchor, Jack was facing his own interrogation. His friends hadn't waited long to start teasing him about his new student. So, the mysterious city girl, Mike, the dockmaster, grinned over his beer. She's pretty easy on the eyes for someone who doesn't know a stern from a bow. Jack focused on his water. He couldn't afford beer tonight. She's just eager to learn. Nothing more to it. Right, Tom chimed in from the next table. That's why you spent 3 hours fixing her boat for free. Because you're such a dedicated teacher. Speaking of teaching, Bill added with a knowing smirk. Heard you're taking her out tomorrow. Early start, eh? Jack stood up, trying to hide his embarrassment. I need to check on Mom. Early day tomorrow. The good-natured laughter followed him out the door. He paused outside, breathing in the salt air. There was something about Sarah that intrigued him, a depth behind her eyes that suggested she was running from something or maybe towards something. He knew that look. He'd seen it in the mirror often enough. The next morning arrived with a heavy fog rolling in from the sea. Sarah arrived at the dock exactly at dawn, wearing practical clothing that still probably cost more than she intended. Jack was already there preparing his boat. Ready for your first lesson? He asked, offering a hand to help her aboard. The moment their hands touched, a jolt of awareness passed between them. Sarah steadied herself, both physically and emotionally. Ready as I'll ever be. As they pulled away from the dock, neither noticed James watching from the shadows, his phone to his ear. Yes, she's still maintaining her cover, he reported to the board. But I'm worried. She's getting invested. The fog grew thicker as Jack's boat, Grace, pushed further into the harbor. Sarah stood at the helm, Jack's hands gently guiding hers on the wheel. The proximity was both thrilling and terrifying for both of them. Feel the current? Jack's voice was soft near her ear. The boat will tell you what she needs. You just have to listen. Suddenly a larger vessel emerged from the fog, heading straight for them. Sarah panicked, her hands tightening on the wheel. Jack's steady hands covered hers, helping her make the correction. Easy, he murmured. Trust yourself. Trust the boat. They avoided the collision easily, but Sarah's heart was racing, and not just from the near miss. Jack's presence behind her, his quiet confidence, the trust he showed in letting her handle his precious boat, it all felt more real than anything in her carefully constructed world. As the fog began to lift, Sarah realized she was in dangerous waters indeed. She'd come here to find an honest man, to test someone's reaction to her wealth. Instead, she was finding parts of herself she'd forgotten existed, and risking far more than she'd planned. Jack, watching her handle the wheel with growing confidence, felt his own certainty slipping. He'd promised himself after his father's death that the sea would be his only mistress. But watching the sunrise paint golden highlights in Sarah's hair, seeing the joy in her eyes as she mastered each new skill, he realized some promises were made to be broken. Neither of them knew that fate, like the tide, was already pulling them toward a revelation that would either destroy everything or prove that true worth can't be measured in dollars and cents. Dawn painted the sky in watercolor hues as Grace cut through the morning waters. Sarah had been joining Jack for a week now, and each day brought new discoveries about fishing, about him, about herself. "You're getting better with those knots," Jack observed as Sarah secured a line with growing confidence. Her hands, once manicured to perfection, now showed the beginning signs of honest work. "I had a good teacher," she replied, trying to ignore how his smile made her heart skip. She'd learned more than just fishing techniques over the past week. She'd learned how Jack checked his mother's medication schedule before every trip, how he kept spare bait for the struggling newcomers who couldn't afford their own, how he knew every boat's engine sound by heart. The nets came up light again, continuing a pattern that made Sarah increasingly aware of the worry lines around Jack's eyes. Still, he maintained his optimism. "Water's clearer today, that's a good sign." "How long has the fishing been this bad?" Sarah asked, helping him sort through their meager catch. Jack's hands stilled momentarily. "Since the big commercial operations moved in last year, they're taking everything before it reaches the inner waters." He shrugged, but Sarah caught the tension in his shoulders. "Mum's medication costs went up around the same time. Bad timing, I guess." Sarah felt the weight of her platinum credit cards in her cottage, knowing she could solve his problems with a single phone call. Instead, she asked, "Tell me about her, your mom." Jack's face softened as he worked. "She was a teacher before the illness, still is in her own way. Never meet someone without teaching them something." He smiled. "She'd like you. She always says the best students are the ones who know they have something to learn." They worked in comfortable silence until Sarah noticed him rubbing his shoulder. "Old injury?" "Not exactly." Jack seemed embarrassed. "The engine needs maintenance I can't afford right now. Makes hauling the nets harder." The confession hung between them, and Sarah had to physically stop herself from offering to help. She'd learned that Jack's pride was as much a part of him as his kindness. "My father," she found herself saying instead, "he used to say that struggle builds character." The irony of quoting her billionaire father's wisdom about struggle wasn't lost on her. "Sounds like a wise man," Jack replied. "Is he gone?" Sarah finished softly. 3 years ago, heart attack in the middle of a board. She caught herself. In the middle of work. Jack touched her shoulder gently, and Sarah felt the warmth of his hand through her jacket. "I'm sorry. My dad's been gone 5 years now. Storm took him and his boat." The moment stretched between them, filled with shared understanding of loss. A sudden spray of water broke the tension as a pod of dolphins surfaced nearby. "They're good luck," Jack said, his face lighting up. "Dad always said so." Sure enough, their next net came up fuller. As they sorted through the catch, Jack taught her the names of each fish, their habits, the best ways to spot them. Sarah found herself fascinated not just by the information, but by the way his whole being came alive when sharing his knowledge. "You know," he said as they headed back to port, "most people would have quit after the first day. Dawn starts, heavy, lifting, fish guts everywhere." He glanced at her curiously. "What makes you stick with it?" Sarah looked out at the horizon, choosing her words carefully. "In my old life, everything was artificial. Numbers on screens, meetings about meetings. Here, everything is real. The work, the people." She met his eyes. The connections. Something shifted in Jack's expression, a softening around his eyes that made Sarah's breath catch. Before he could respond, a large commercial trawler cut across their path, its wake rocking the smaller boat. "Rainbow Enterprises," Jack said, his voice tight. "They're the ones pushing all the local operations out, buying up licenses using industrial methods that leave nothing for us small operators." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Rainbow Enterprises was one of her company's recent acquisitions, a fact she'd forgotten until this moment. She watched Jack's face as he stared at the trawler, seeing for the first time the real human cost of what her board had dismissed as market consolidation. As they unloaded their catch at the dock, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't reveal who she was, not yet, but maybe she could find a way to help that wouldn't wound Jack's pride. "You know," she said casually, "I used to work in business analysis. Maybe I could look at your books, find some ways to make things more efficient." Jack hesitated, and Sarah held her breath. Finally, he nodded. "Mom's medical bills aren't getting any smaller. Guess I can't afford pride right now." Watching him secure the boat for the night, Sarah felt the weight of her deception pressing down on her. She was falling for a man who valued honesty above all else, while living a lie. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd come looking for someone, genuine, only to become the thing she despised. As they parted ways for the evening, their hands brushed briefly. The simple contact sent electricity through both of them, a reminder that whatever was growing between them was real, even if her identity wasn't. The weekend brought Millport's monthly farmers' market to the harbour front. Sarah walked among the stalls, amazed by how different it felt from the luxury food market she was used to. Here, every vendor had a story, every product a face behind. "Try this." Jack appeared beside her, offering a piece of homemade bread. "Mrs. Anderson's sourdough. She's been using the same starter for 30 years. Sarah took a bite, closing her eyes at the complex flavor. "This is incredible." "Better than that fancy city bread, huh?" Jack teased, leading her through the market. He seemed to know everyone, stopping to chat with each vendor, introducing Sarah with a warmth that made her feel like she belonged. At one stall, an elderly woman was struggling to set up her display of hand-knitted items. Without hesitation, Jack stepped in to help, efficiently fixing her wobbly table. The woman pressed a scarf into his hands as thanks. "For your mother," she insisted. "To keep her warm during treatments." Jack tried to refuse, but the woman wouldn't hear of it. Sarah watched the interaction, understanding more about this community with each passing moment. Here, wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in kindness, in remembered favors, in helped neighbors. "Your mom's treatments," Sarah ventured as they walked on. "Are they working?" Jack's face showed a mix of hope and worry. "Some days are better than others. The new medication helps, but—" He trailed off, the cost clearly weighing on his mind. They stopped at the edge of the harbor, watching children feed seagulls. A street musician played guitar nearby, his case open for donations. Jack dropped in his last $2 without hesitation. "You know what I love about this town," Sarah said softly. "Everyone takes care of each other. No hidden agendas, no keeping score. Unlike where you're from?" Jack asked carefully, studying her face. Sarah thought about her board meetings, the corporate maneuvering, the constant calculations of profit and loss. "Let's just say kindness usually comes with strings attached. Must be lonely," Jack observed. His hand finding hers naturally, as if they'd been doing this forever. The simple touch sent warmth spreading through Sarah's chest. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the harbor in shades of gold and pink. The guitarist switched to a slower song, and couples began dancing on the weathered boardwalk. "Care to dance?" Jack asked, a hint of shyness in his smile. "I don't know this kind of dancing," Sarah admitted, thinking of the formal ballroom lessons she'd taken for charity galas. "No proper steps needed." Jack pulled her gently into his arms. "Just feel the music." As they swayed together, Sarah felt the last walls around her heart beginning to crumble. Jack's hand was warm on her waist, his presence solid and real in a way her previous relationships had never been. She rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the scent of sea salt and sunshine that seemed to cling to him. The moment was perfect, until Sarah opened her eyes and spotted James at the edge of the crowd, his worried face reminding her of the deception at the heart of this budding romance. Jack felt her tense. "Everything okay? Just remembered something I need to do," she said, hating how easily the lies came now. "I should go." "Sarah," Jack's voice stopped her. Would you like to come to dinner tomorrow? Meet my mom. She's been asking about the mysterious woman who's got her son teaching fishing lessons." The invitation, so genuine and hopeful, felt like a knife in Sarah's heart. Meeting his mother meant deeper involvement, more lies, more chances for her. True identity to be discovered. But looking at Jack's face, she couldn't say no. "I'd love to," she heard herself say. Walking home alone, Sarah passed the town's small pharmacy. Through the window, she saw Jack picking up his mother's prescription, counting out bills carefully from a worn wallet. The sight made her decision clear. She had to find a way to help him without compromising his pride or revealing her identity. But as she watched him thank the pharmacist with a genuine smile, despite his obvious financial strain, she wondered if any amount of money could match the wealth of character she saw in him. Back in her cottage, Sarah ignored 3 urgent emails from her board and a text from James warning her about upcoming press inquiries. Instead, she stood at her window, watching the harbor lights, and wondering how someone who owned half of Manhattan could feel most at home in a small fishing town, in the arms of a man who owned little more than his boat and his integrity. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Jack's small office, really just a converted storage room at the dock, as Sarah pored over his business records. Her corporate expertise, though carefully disguised, was already spotting patterns and possibilities. "Your fuel costs are killing you," she said, tapping the worn ledger. "But I notice you always take the same route out. What if we mapped the fishing patterns against tide schedules? Find spots closer to shore?" Jack leaned over her shoulder, his presence sending a familiar warmth through her. The bigger operations scared away most of the coastal fish. Not necessarily. Sarah pulled out a chart she'd been working on. "I've been tracking the local catches. There's a pattern to when the commercial boats move through. If we time it right—" "We?" Jack's question was soft, loaded with meaning. Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "I mean, your operations." But they both knew she'd stopped being just a student days ago. Over the next few hours, they developed a new strategy. Sarah was careful to couch her business expertise in terms of things she'd read or techniques she'd heard about, but her heart soared watching Jack's eyes light up with renewed hope. "This could work," he said, studying their plans. "With these fuel savings alone, Mum's new treatment wouldn't be such a stretch." The mention of his mother reminded Sarah of their dinner plans that evening. Her stomach fluttered with equal parts. Anticipation and dread. Meeting Catherine Morrison meant crossing a line, making everything more real and more complicated. "Speaking of your mom," Sarah ventured, "should I bring anything tonight?" Jack's smile was worth every moment of guilt. "Just yourself. She's excited to meet you. Says anyone who can get me to actually take a day off must be special." Their eyes met, and for a moment the air seemed to crackle between them. Jack moved closer, his hand finding hers on the desk. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest as he leaned in. "Jack!" Tom's voice boomed from outside. "You've got to see this." The moment broke. They hurried outside to find a small crowd gathered at the dock's edge. A young whale had found its way into the harbor, breaching playfully near the boats. "It's good. Luck," an old fisherman declared. "Best kind of blessing for new beginnings." Jack's hand found Sarah's again as they watched the magnificent creature. The simple contact felt more intimate than any luxury date she'd ever experienced. Later that evening, Sarah found herself in the Morrisons' modest but immaculate home. Catherine Morrison was a slight woman with Jack's kind eyes and an air of a quiet dignity that chemotherapy couldn't dim. "So you're the one who's been keeping my son honest," Catherine said, her smile knowing. "Mom," Jack protested, bringing in a pot of his father's famous fish stew. "He's been teaching me everything he knows," Sarah said, helping to set the table, a domestic task she'd never done before her time in Millport. "Jack's always been a good teacher," Catherine observed. "Gets that from his father. Thomas believed knowledge shared was knowledge multiplied." Throughout dinner, Sarah found herself drawn into the warm dynamic between mother and son. They shared stories of Thomas Morrison, of Jack's childhood adventures, of Catherine's teaching days. Each tale revealed more layers to the man Sarah was rapidly falling for. "You know," Catherine said as Jack cleared the dishes, "I haven't seen him smile like this since before his father died." Sarah's guilt twisted sharply. "He's special," she said softly. "This whole town is. I've never experienced anything like it." Catherine's eyes were gentle but penetrating. "Sometimes we find home in the most unexpected places." Home. The word echoed in Sarah's mind. This simple kitchen, with its worn counters and hand-sewn curtains, felt more like home than her penthouse ever had. When Jack walked her home later, their hands found each other naturally. The night was clear, stars twinkling above the harbor. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For what? For seeing us, this town, these people, me, for seeing us as we are." The irony of his words nearly broke her. She was the one who wasn't what she seemed. They reached her cottage, and this time there were no interruptions. Jack's hand cupped her cheek gently, his eyes asking permission. When their lips met, it was soft, questioning, then deeper with growing certainty. For a moment, Sarah let herself forget everything, her company, her wealth, her lies. There was only this, the taste of salt on his lips, the strength of his arms around her, the absolute rightness of being here. When they finally parted, Jack's smile held such genuine joy that Sarah knew with crushing certainty that she was in trouble. Because she wasn't just testing him anymore. Somewhere between fishing lessons and business plans, between community kindness and family dinners, she'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love. And she had no idea how to fix it. Millport's annual harbor festival transformed the waterfront into a wonderland of twinkling lights and delicious smells. Local fishing boats, decorated with colorful streamers and lanterns, created a magical backdrop against the darkening sky. For Sarah, who had attended galas in every major city worldwide, this simple celebration felt more enchanting than any black-tie event. "Cotton candy," Jack offered, holding out a fluffy pink cloud, "made by Old Joe himself. Town tradition for 40 years. Sarah took a bite, laughing as the sugar dissolved on her tongue. "I can't remember the last time I had cotton candy." "Let me guess," Jack teased. Too many calories for the city folk? If he only knew how many charity galas she'd attended where the food was more photography prop than sustenance. Here, everything was meant to be enjoyed, from Mrs. Anderson's fresh-baked pies to the local brewery's special festival ale. They wandered through the crowd, stopping to chat with what seemed like half the town. Sarah watched Jack interact with everyone, helping an elderly couple set up their craft stall, lifting excited kids onto his shoulders for a better view of the harbor, discussing tide patterns with fellow fishermen. In every interaction, she saw the natural leadership that made people gravitate toward him. "Jack! Sarah!" Catherine waved from her seat near the community stage, where local musicians were setting up. Despite her illness, she'd insisted on coming, saying she hadn't missed a festival in 30 years, and wasn't about to start now. "Mom, you should be resting," Jack fretted, adjusting her shawl, the same one from the market stall. "Nonsense," Catherine declared. "I'm not missing my son's big moment." Sarah looked at Jack questioningly. He rubbed his neck, embarrassed. "They asked me to sing Dad's old festival song. It's kind of a tradition." "He has the most beautiful voice," Catherine told Sarah. "Just like his father." Before Jack could protest, the festival organizer was calling him to the stage. He squeezed Sarah's hand before walking up. The opening notes of an old folk song filled The air, and then Jack's voice, rich, warm, and full of emotion, began to tell a story of sea and shore, of love and home. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the pure authenticity of the moment. Around her, townspeople swayed, many singing along. These weren't just lyrics to them. This was their story, their community's heart set to music. Sarah thought of the professional performers she'd hired for corporate events, and how none of them had ever moved her like this. When Jack finished, the applause was thunderous. He made his way back through the crowd, accepting backslaps and compliments with characteristic humility. "Dance with me," he asked Sarah, holding out his hand as the band struck up a lively tune. They joined other couples on the makeshift dance floor, moving together as if they'd done this 100 times before. Jack spun her under the lantern lights, and Sarah felt dizzy with more than just the movement. "You know what I love about you," Jack said softly as they swayed to a slower song. "You don't try to be anything you're not." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She buried her face in his shoulder, unable to meet his eyes. "Hey!" He tilted her chin up gently. "You okay?" She struggled to find words that weren't lies. "I've never felt this real before." And that, at least, was true. Every moment with Jack felt more authentic than her entire previous life as E. The evening wore on. They found a quiet spot on the dock, away from the festival's cheerful chaos. The water below reflected the celebration's lights, creating a mirror world of dancing colors. "Look," Jack pointed to where phosphorescent plankton created trails of light in the dark water. "Dad used to say they're the sea's stars." Sarah leaned against him, breathing in his now familiar scent of salt air and sunshine. "Your dad seems to have had a saying for everything." He did. Jack's arm tightened around her. "He also used to say that when you find something real, you hold on to it with both hands." Their eyes met in the starlight, and Sarah saw her own feelings reflected in his gaze. When he kissed her this time, it held a promise of something deeper, something lasting. Later, watching fireworks burst over the harbor, Sarah felt the weight of her phone in her pocket. Ignored messages from James about urgent board matters, about press inquiries, about her company's stock price. But here, with Jack's arms around her and the town's collective oohs and ahs filling the air, none of that seemed to matter. She was living in two worlds now, and she knew they would collide eventually. But for tonight, she let herself believe. In the magic of small-town festivals, in the power of authentic connections, in the possibility that love really could bridge any gap. What she didn't know was that the collision would come sooner than she thought, and it would test everything they'd built together. The weather changed, with the brutal swiftness that only coastal storms can muster. One moment, the morning sun was promising another beautiful day. The next, dark clouds rolled in like an army, bringing with them winds that made the harbors. Warning bells clang wildly. Jack burst into Sarah's cottage without knocking. Storm's coming, a big one. The fleet's still out there. Sarah was already pulling on her waterproof gear, a far cry from her designer raincoats in Manhattan. "What do you need me to do?" "It's dangerous." He hesitated. "You don't have to—" "Jack!" She cut him off. "I'm coming!" They raced to the harbor where chaos was already unfolding. Waves crashed against the seawall, sending spray higher than the lighthouse. The radio crackled with distress calls from the fishing fleet, caught out in the sudden squall. "Tom's out there with his boy!" Mike, the harbormaster, shouted over the wind. "Engine trouble, they're taking on water!" Without hesitation, Jack started prepping Grace for launch. Sarah moved alongside him, helping with the preparations they'd practiced countless times. Their eyes met briefly, an entire conversation passing without words. "You've got the radio?" he asked. Though he already knew the answer, she'd learned more than just fishing these past weeks. "Channel 16, she confirmed. "I'll coordinate with the Coast Guard." The harbormaster tried to stop them. "It's too dangerous." "Wait for—" But Grace was already pulling away from the dock, Jack at the helm with Sarah beside him. The small boat fought against waves that seemed determined to push them back to shore. Sarah's heart hammered as they crested each massive swell. But her voice remained steady on the radio, relaying positions, coordinating with other rescue boats. She'd managed billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but nothing had prepared her for this raw confrontation with nature's power. They found Tom's boat listing badly to starboard, waves washing over the deck where Tom and his teenage son clung to the wheelhouse. Jack brought Grace alongside with a skill that left Sarah breathless. "Jump!" Jack shouted over the howling wind. "Now!" Tom pushed his son first. Sarah helped the boy aboard, his thin frame shaking with cold and fear. Then Tom jumped, just as a massive wave crashed over his boat's deck. But they weren't done. More boats needed help, their engines swamped by the fierce waves. Jack worked tirelessly, maneuvering Grace through the storm, while Sarah maintained radio contact with the Coast Guard and harbour. Hours passed in a blur of wind, waves, and desperate rescues. Sarah's muscles ached from helping pull people aboard, her throat raw from shouting over the storm, yet she felt more alive than she ever had in any boardroom. Then disaster struck. A massive wave caught Grace broadside, sending Sarah stumbling. Jack lunged to catch her just as another wave crashed over the bow. For a heart-stopping moment, they both went down. Sarah felt Jack's arms lock around her, anchoring her to the boat as icy water tried to tear them apart. When the wave passed, they found themselves tangled together in the wheelhouse, soaked and gasping. "I can't lose you," Jack said hoarsely, his face inches from hers. "I know it's fast, I know it's crazy, but Sarah, I'm falling in love with you." The storm's fury faded into background noise. Sarah stared into his eyes, seeing nothing but truth. "There, I love you too," she whispered. And in that moment, it was the only truth that mattered. Their kiss tasted of salt spray and adrenaline, passionate and desperate and perfect. The storm raged around them, but in that moment they were anchored in each other. Reality crashed back as another distress call crackled over the radio. They broke apart, returning to the work of rescue with renewed purpose. By the time they finally made it back to harbour, they'd helped save 4 boats and 12 lives. The dock was crowded with worried families who erupted in cheers as Grace pulled in. Tom's wife rushed forward to embrace her husband and son. Others came to thank them, to clap Jack on the back, to praise their bravery. Sarah stood slightly apart, watching Jack accept the thanks with characteristic humility. He caught her eye. Across the crowd, and the look they shared held the weight of everything that had passed between them during the storm. Later, as they walked home through the rain-washed streets, Jack took her hand. "You were amazing out there, like you'd been doing this your whole life." Sarah squeezed his hand, fighting back tears, because she hadn't been doing this her whole life. She'd been in boardrooms and luxury hotels, making decisions that affected people like Jack without ever knowing their faces. "Jack," she started, knowing she needed to tell him the truth, but he kissed her again, soft and sweet, and the words died in her throat. "Whatever you're about to say," he murmured against her lips, "it can wait until tomorrow." Sarah let herself believe that, just for one more night. But as she fell asleep in her cottage, she knew tomorrow was coming, bringing with it decisions that would change everything. Sarah woke to the insistent buzzing of her phone. 27 missed calls from James, 15 from board members, and one message that made her blood run cold. "CNN is running a story about your disappearance." She quickly scanned the news article. "Bennett Enterprises CEO's extended absence raises questions." The stock had dropped 12 points since yesterday. Investors were getting nervous. A knock at her door made her nearly drop the phone. "Sarah," Jack's voice called out. "Thought you might want to join me for the morning catch. Just a minute." She scrambled to hide evidence of her other life. The laptop showing quarterly reports, the designer watch on her nightstand, the business cards she still hadn't thrown away. When she opened the door, Jack's smile made her forget everything else. He was holding 2 coffee cups from the local diner. "Thought you might be sore after yesterday's adventure, my hero," she said. accepting the coffee and trying to ignore the guilt churning in her stomach. They walked to the dock together, their shoulders brushing. The harbor was calm today, as if the storm had never happened. Other fishermen called out greetings, many thanking them again for yesterday's rescues. "You're celebrities now," Tom teased as they passed his boat. "Paper's gonna want interviews." Sarah's step faltered. "Paper?" "Local weekly," Jack explained. "They cover everything that happens in town, storm rescues, big news." Before Sarah could process this new complication, her phone buzzed again. James's message was urgent. "Emergency board meeting called. They're voting on temporary leadership. You need to make a statement." "Everything okay?" Jack asked, noticing her distraction. "Just family stuff," she lied, hating how easily the deceptions came now. They were preparing Grace for launch when a sleek town car pulled into the harbor parking lot. Sarah recognized James the moment he stepped out, though he looked oddly out of place in his attempt at casual clothes. "I have to take care of something," she told Jack quickly. "Rain check on fishing?" She hurried to intercept James before he could approach the dock. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, pulling him toward her cottage. "The board is in chaos," James said once they were inside. "The Beijing merger is stalling. Rainbow Enterprises is threatening to back out of the deal." "Lower your voice," Sarah warned, glancing at the windows. "You need to come back," James insisted. "At least make a public statement. Show your face at the New York office." Sarah paced her small living room. "I just need more time." "Time for what?" James's voice softened. "Sarah, I've known you since business school. I've never seen you like this. This town, that fisherman, his name is Jack." "Fine. Jack, what happens when he finds out who you really are? That you own the company, pushing him out of business?" Sarah sank onto her couch. "I'll fix it. I'll find a way to help the local fishermen without revealing that you've been lying to everyone." James shook his head. "The longer this goes on, the worse it'll be." A knock at the door made them both freeze. "Sarah," Jack's voice called out, "just wanted to check if you're okay." James raised an eyebrow. Sarah motioned him to be quiet as she opened the door slightly. "I'm fine," she told Jack, "just dealing with some family business." Jack's concerned expression made her heart ache. "You sure? You seemed upset earlier." "I thought maybe—" He ran a hand through his hair. "Mum's making her famous clam chowder for lunch. Thought you might want to join us." Behind the door, James made a frustrated gesture. Sarah felt torn between her two worlds. "I'm sorry, I can't. Today, but tomorrow?" The disappointment in Jack's eyes was almost unbearable. "Sure, tomorrow." He turned to leave, then stopped. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" Sarah managed a nod, then closed the door before he could see her tears. "You're in love with him," James said. "It wasn't a question." "That's not relevant to the company's interests," Sarah replied, falling back on corporate speak like armor. "The Sarah Bennett I know doesn't run from hard decisions. Maybe that's because the Sarah Bennett you know isn't the real me." She stared out her window at the harbor, at Jack's retreating figure. "Maybe I never knew who I really was until I came here." "The press will find you eventually," James warned. "Do you want Jack to learn the truth from CNN?" Sarah closed her eyes. Everything she'd built here, Jack's trust, the town's acceptance, her own sense of belonging, rested on a foundation of lies. One strong wind, and it would all collapse. "One more week," she said finally. "Give me one more week to find a way to make this right." James sighed, but nodded. As he left, he paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I hope you figure it out. I've never seen you this happy." Sarah watched his car drive away, taking with it the last barrier between her two worlds. Soon she would have to choose, but for now she pulled out her phone and began researching ways to save small fishing operations from corporate takeovers, because if she was going to lose everything, she was at least going to make sure Jack and his community survived the fallout. The Rusty Anchor was unusually crowded for a Tuesday morning. Sarah noticed the strange atmosphere the moment she walked in. Hushed conversations, people glancing at their phones, quick looks in her direction. She was heading to meet Jack for The usual morning coffee when she saw it, her face on the TV above the bar. CEO Sarah Bennett's unexpected absence has sparked concerns among investors, the news anchor was saying. Sources suggest the billionaire executive has been spotted in a small fishing town. The mug Jack was holding crashed to the floor. Sarah spun around to find him standing in the doorway, his face a mask of disbelief as he looked from the TV to her and back again. "Jack," she started, but the words died in her throat. "Bennett Enterprises," he said quietly. "The company that owns Rainbow Fishing. That's you?" The entire bar had gone silent. Sarah could feel every eye on them, could see the moment of recognition rippling through the crowd as they connected. In there, Sarah with the polished executive on the screen. "I was going to tell you," she managed. "When?" His voice was hollow. "Before or after your company finished destroying everything we've built here?" Tom stepped forward, his tablet in hand. "Jack, look at this. She's worth billions. Bennett Enterprises just bought out 3 more small fishing operations last week." Sarah felt the walls closing in. Those acquisitions were in motion before. "I came here. I didn't what?" Jack's voice rose slightly. "Didn't think it was important to mention that you own the company pushing us all out of business, that while you were learning our quaint little fishing techniques, your corporation was buying up fishing licenses right out from under us." Catherine appeared in the doorway, her face concerned. "Jack, maybe we should—" "Was any of it real?" Jack asked, his eyes locked on Sarah. "Or was this all some kind of corporate research? Get to know the little people before you crush them?" "Everything I felt was real," Sarah said desperately. "Everything with you. The woman I fell in love with wouldn't lie to an entire town, wouldn't pretend to be something she's not." He ran a hand through his hair, laughing bitterly. "God, I even told you about Mom's medical bills. Was that entertaining? Poor Fisherman pouring his heart out while you could have bought the whole hospital." Sarah stepped toward him, but he backed away. The movement hurt worse than if he'd shouted, "At her! Jack, please let me explain." "Miss Bennett!" A reporter had somehow already found her, pushing through the crowd with a microphone. "Is this a publicity stunt? Are you researching new market strategies?" More reporters were appearing at the door. The story was too good to resist. Billionaire CEO found slumming it in a fishing village. Sarah felt her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "No questions," she said automatically, falling back on media training. The corporate tone felt foreign in her mouth now, here in this place where she'd learned to be real. "There's your answer," Jack said quietly. "Guess we know which world you really belong to." He turned and walked out, ignoring her call of his name. Catherine gave Sarah a long, sad look before following her son. The reporters pressed closer. Questions overlapping. "Miss Bennett, what about the Beijing merger? Is this a breakdown? Are you abandoning your company?" But Sarah barely heard them. Through the window, she watched Jack stride down the dock, his shoulders rigid with hurt and betrayal. She'd come here looking for someone genuine, only to become the biggest fraud of all. Mike, the harbor master, who'd taught her how to read weather patterns, wouldn't meet her eyes. Mrs. Anderson, who just yesterday shared her secret sourdough recipe, turned away when Sarah looked at her. One by one, the townspeople who'd welcomed her, taught her, made her feel at home, retreated from her presence. In the end, she stood alone in a crowd of reporters, wearing the same simple clothes that had helped her blend in, now feeling like the worst kind of costume. On the TV above the bar, business analysts were already speculating about her mental state, about corporate power struggles, about stock prices and shareholder confidence. But all Sarah could think about was the look in Jack's eyes when he realized that everything he'd believed about her was built on lies. She'd gotten what she came for. She'd found someone genuine, someone who valued honesty above all else. And in doing so, she'd proven herself to be anything but. The next few days passed in a blur of headlines and heartache. Sarah remained in her cottage, watching through the window as her simple life dissolved into chaos. Reporters camped outside, turning Millport's quiet streets into a media circus. Local news vans cluttered the harbour parking lot, their satellite dishes stark against the weathered fishing boats. Jack hadn't returned her calls. She'd tried visiting his house, only to find Catherine on the porch, looking older than ever. "He's out on the water," Catherine said, her voice gentle despite everything. "He goes out early, comes back late. Avoiding the reporters, he says," but she trailed off, both of them knowing he was avoiding much more than just the media. "I never meant to hurt him," Sarah whispered. Catherine studied her for a long moment. "You know what the hardest part is for him? Not the money, not even the lie itself. It's that he can't figure out which parts were real." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. "All of it was real. Everything I felt, maybe." Catherine interrupted softly. "But how can he believe that now?" Inside her cottage, Sarah's two worlds collided in surreal ways. James had arranged for her designer clothes to be delivered, but they looked alien, hanging next to her newly acquired fishing gear. Her corporate laptop seemed out of place on the simple wooden table where she and Jack had shared so many meals. The town had split into factions. Some, like Tom, saw her as a corporate spy who'd intentionally infiltrated their community. Others, particularly those who'd worked closely with her, defended her intentions while still struggling with the deception. She helped save lives during the storm, Mike argued at the rusty anchor, loud enough for the gossip to reach her. "That wasn't fake." "No," Tom countered, "but maybe it was just research on local emergency response systems for some corporate takeover." The theories grew wilder with each passing day. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly with messages from board members, PR teams, and crisis managers. The stock had stabilized after her location was revealed, but shareholders were demanding answers. One afternoon, Sarah forced herself to walk to the harbour, needing to feel connected to the life she'd built here. She found Jack's boat gone from its usual spot, but Grace's absence wasn't what made her heart stop. It was the "for sale" sign on the boat next to it. Old Pete's vessel, the one he'd had for 30 years. "Can't compete with the big operations anymore," Pete said, appearing beside her. "Figure it's time to quit while I can still get something for her." Sarah turned to him, ideas already forming. "What if you didn't have to sell? What if there was a way—" "No offense, Ms. Bennett," Pete cut her off, "but we don't need your charity. What we needed was honesty." She watched him walk away, remembering how he'd taught her to tie complex knots, how he'd shared stories of 50 years at sea. Now he wouldn't even meet her eyes. That evening, she sat on her cottage steps, watching the sunset paint the harbour in colours that seemed duller without Jack beside her. A figure approached through the gathering dusk, Catherine carrying a covered dish. "You haven't been eating," she said, setting down what Sarah could smell was her famous clam chowder. "A mother knows these things. Why are you being kind to me?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking. Catherine eased herself onto the step. "Because I saw how you looked at my son when you thought no one was watching. That kind of love doesn't come from a corporate strategy. I ruined everything." "Maybe," Catherine agreed. "Or maybe you just took the long way around to finding yourself." She stood with effort. "Jack's hurting, but under that hurt he's confused. Because the woman he fell in love with, the one who helped neighbors without hesitation, who fought through storms to save lives, who looked at him like he hung the moon, that woman doesn't match the corporate billionaire on TV. They're both me," Sarah whispered. "I just didn't know the first one existed until I came here." Catherine's hand was warm on her shoulder. "Then maybe it's time both of those women had a conversation with my son, when he's ready." After Catherine left, Sarah stood at the harbour's edge, watching boats return in the fading light. Every one of them represented a family, a story, a way of life her company had threatened, without her even realizing it. She pulled out her phone, ignoring the hundreds of corporate messages to open the photos she'd taken over the past weeks. Jack teaching her to mend nets, festival lights reflecting on the water, the community celebrating after the storm rescue. In each image, she saw something her billions couldn't buy: authenticity, community, love. And in that moment, Sarah Bennett, CEO of a global corporation, finally knew exactly what she had to do. The question was whether it would be enough to save what she'd lost. The Bennett Enterprises boardroom fell silent as Sarah strode in, dressed not in her usual designer suit, but in the practical clothes she'd grown accustomed to in Millport. For the first time in her career, she didn't care about projecting corporate power. She had something more important to prove. Before anyone speaks, she held up a hand to quiet the murmuring board members. I want you to look at these numbers. She projected a detailed analysis onto the screen. This is what we're losing by destroying small fishing operations. Ms. Bennett, Charles Whitney began, the Rainbow Enterprises acquisition is short-sighted, she cut him off. We're not just losing fish stocks through overharvesting, we're losing generations of knowledge, sustainable practices, and yes, profit. Potential. She clicked through slides showing the data she'd gathered during her time in Millport. Sustainable fishing patterns, traditional knowledge of breeding grounds, community-based conservation efforts, all things the corporate algorithms had missed. I'm proposing a complete restructuring of our fishing operations. She laid out her plan, a partnership program with local fishermen, investment in sustainable practices, and most importantly, a halt to the aggressive buyouts. This is unprecedented, one board member sputtered. So is this, Sarah took a deep breath. I'm selling my personal yacht and vacation properties. The proceeds will establish a fund for modernizing small fishing operations while preserving their independence. The boardroom erupted in chaos. James, standing in the corner, gave her a subtle thumbs up. Back in Millport that afternoon, Sarah walked into the Rusty Anchor and posted a notice on the community board. Within an hour, the bar was packed with fishermen reading her proposal. Let me get this straight, Tom said, scanning the document. You're offering to help us upgrade our boats, modernize our equipment? With no strings attached, Sarah confirmed. Each operation stays independent. We'll provide resources, technology, and market access, but you maintain control. Why should we trust you now? Someone called out. Sarah met their skeptical gazes. Because I learned more about sustainable fishing in 2 months here than in 5 years of corporate reports. Because this town showed me what real value looks like, and because sometimes the biggest profit comes from doing the right thing. She laid out the details. Interest-free loans for equipment upgrades, a cooperative processing facility to help small operators compete with larger ones, and a marketing program highlighting sustainable, locally caught fish. The papers are already drawn up, she finished. I've committed my personal funds, not corporate money. This isn't Bennett Enterprises helping you. This is me trying to protect something precious I found here. Old Pete was the first to step forward. I reckon my boat could use those new nets you mentioned, instead of selling her, that is. Others followed, asking questions, reviewing the proposals. Sarah answered everything honestly, acknowledging past mistakes, explaining her vision for the future. Mike, the harbour master, studied her carefully. Jack knows about this? Not yet, Sarah admitted. I needed to prove it was real first. Actions, not words. As if summoned by his name, Jack appeared in the doorway. The room fell silent. As he walked over, picked up the proposal, and began to read. Sarah's heart hammered as she watched his expression. She'd poured everything into this plan. Her understanding of business, her newfound knowledge of fishing, and most importantly, her love for this community and the man before her. The processing facility, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. It would create local jobs. At least 30, Sarah nodded, plus training programs for sustainable fishing practices. And Bennett Enterprises gets nothing out of this. They get a lesson in long-term thinking, and I get a chance to sleep at night knowing I did something right. Jack set down the papers and really looked at her for the first time since the revelation. Sarah held her breath. The Sarah Bennett I see on TV wouldn't risk her personal fortune on a fishing village, he said slowly. You're right, she replied, but I'm not just her anymore. The woman who fell in love with this town, with its people, With you, she's real too, more real than the CEO ever was. Something shifted in Jack's expression. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps understanding. He picked up a pen and began making notes on the proposal. The loan terms need work, he said, and we'll need guarantees about fishing ground access. We? Sarah's voice wavered. Jack met her eyes. You've got the business knowledge. We've got the fishing experience. If this is going to work, it needs both. It wasn't a declaration of love or even forgiveness, but it was a start. As they bent over the papers together, Sarah felt hope bloom in her chest. She'd come to Millport looking for an honest man and found instead her own truth. Now, maybe, she could begin to rebuild what her lies had broken, not just with Jack, but with an entire community that had taught her the real meaning of wealth. The morning sun glinted off the new equipment being installed at the harbour. 2 weeks had passed since Sarah's proposal, and Millport was slowly transforming. Modern winches replaced rusted equipment, and the foundation was being laid for the processing facility, but the biggest changes weren't visible to the eye. Sarah sat in her cottage, staring at the resignation letter on her laptop. The board had called an emergency meeting for tomorrow, her final chance to retain her position as CEO. Their message was clear: return to New York full-time or step down. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Catherine stood there, looking better than she had in weeks. The new treatment is working, she said before Sarah could ask. The specialist you recommended, he's optimistic. I'm glad, Sarah said softly, though she'd purposely kept her involvement in Catherine's medical care anonymous. How's Jack? Stubborn, like his father. Catherine settled into a chair. He spent every day helping others understand the new equipment, teaching them how to use it, just like you knew he would. Sarah smiled despite herself. Of course, Jack would turn his own lifeline into a way to help others. It was one of the countless things she loved about him. The board wants an answer, Sarah admitted, about whether I'm coming back. And are you? I don't know who I am anymore, Sarah confessed. The Sarah who ran Bennett Enterprises seems like a stranger now, but I can't just abandon my responsibilities. Seems to me, Catherine said carefully, that you're finally finding your real responsibilities. Before Sarah could respond, James called. The Beijing investors are threatening to pull out unless you return, and the press is having a field day with rumors about your mental state. Sarah watched through her window as Jack helped old Pete with his new navigation system. What if we restructured the entire fishing division? Made sustainability and community partnership our core model. The board will never agree without you there to fight for it. And there was the choice, laid bare. She could return to her old life, wielding corporate power to protect Millport from afar. Or she could stay, building something new from the ground up, but losing the influence her position gave her. Meanwhile, Jack faced his own dilemma. The harbour master's office was filled with applications from neighbouring towns wanting to join Sarah's initiative. We need someone to coordinate all this, Mike said, dropping another stack of papers on the desk. Someone who understands both worlds. I'm a fisherman, Jack protested, not a businessman. You're both now, Mike replied. Question is, are you ready to admit it? Jack walked the dock later that evening, remembering his father's words about adaptation. The fishing world was changing. Maybe the trick wasn't to fight the change, but to guide it in the right direction. He found Sarah at their usual spot, watching the sunset. They'd been working together daily on the initiative, rebuilding trust through shared purpose, but carefully avoiding deeper conversations. The processing facility manager asked me to take on a leadership role, he said without preamble, overseeing the transition for other towns that want to join the program. Sarah looked at him in surprise. That would mean less time on the water, more time in meetings. He managed a small smile. Guess some of your business sense rubbed off on me. You'd be perfect for it, she said softly. Maybe. He turned to face her fully. But I hear you might be leaving. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibilities and fears. Sarah thought about the resignation letter waiting on her laptop, about the board meeting tomorrow, about all the different kinds of power and responsibility. "I don't want to be that person anymore," she finally said, "the one who makes decisions in boardrooms about people she never meets. I want to build something real here with—" She hesitated, then finished bravely, "with you, if you'll let me." Jack was quiet for a long moment. "The woman I fell in love with disappeared once. How do I know she won't again? Because she was never real to begin with." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "The real me is the one who learned to tie knots with frozen fingers, who fought through storms to help neighbors, who discovered that true wealth isn't about what you have, but about what you build together." The harbor bells chimed softly in the distance. Around them, Millport hummed with evening activity, fishermen returning home, families gathering for dinner, a community continuing its ancient rhythms while embracing necessary change. "I'm still angry," Jack admitted, "but I'm also proud of what you're doing here, of who you're choosing to be." It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but as they stood together watching the sun sink into the sea, it felt like a new beginning. For them, for Millport, and for a different kind of future than either of them had imagined. 1 year later, the Millport harbor looked different now, but its heart remained the same. The new processing facility hummed with activity, providing jobs for dozens of local families. Modern equipment shared space with traditional fishing boats, a testament to the balance Sarah and Jack had fought so hard to achieve. Sarah sat in her office, a simple room overlooking the harbor, nothing like her Manhattan suite. She'd just finished a video call with the board, updating them on the success of what was now called the Millport model. 20 coastal communities had adopted their approach to sustainable fishing, and the numbers spoke for themselves. Increased yields, healthier marine populations, and thriving local economies. "Miss Bennett," her assistant called. "Your husband's here." Jack walked in, still in his fishing gear. He'd been out since dawn, not as a necessity now, but because he still loved the sea. These days he split his time between fishing and managing the community partnership program, teaching other towns how to balance progress with tradition. "How's your mother?" Sarah asked, rising to kiss him. "Better than ever," he smiled. "The doctors say she's in complete remission. She's already talking about returning to teaching, wants to start a program for the fishermen's kids at the community and center." They walked together to their favorite spot on the dock. The evening light caught Sarah's simple wedding ring, a band of silver with wave patterns that matched Jack's. They'd married 6 months ago, right here on these weathered planks, with the whole town in attendance. "Remember the first time we met here?" Jack asked, pulling her close. "When I pretended my boat was broken," Sarah laughed. "Not my proudest moment. I'd say it worked out pretty well." They watched as boats returned for the day, their holds full from sustainable fishing grounds. The rusty anchor was alive with voices, fishermen and office workers, old-timers and newcomers, all part of a community that had grown stronger through change. Old Pete walked by, nodding to them. He'd become one of their most effective trainers, teaching traditional fishing wisdom to the next generation. Tom's son had just started an apprenticeship at the processing facility, combining his father's knowledge with new technologies. The bar. "Beijing investors called again," Sarah mentioned. "They want to replicate our model in their coastal regions. As long as they understand it's not just about profit," Jack said. "It's about people. That's the first thing we teach them," Sarah smiled. "I learned it from a very wise fisherman." Their conversation was interrupted by Mike rushing over. "You two better come quick. The class has a surprise for you." They followed him to the community center where Catherine had been volunteering. Inside, they found the walls covered with children's drawings, pictures of boats, fish, and 2 stick figures labeled Mr. Jack and Ms. Sarah, our town heroes. "They wanted to thank you," Catherine explained, "for saving their parents' way of life Sarah felt tears in her eyes. Here was wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars. Gratitude, community, love. She'd traded her penthouse for a cottage, designer clothes for practical gear, and corporate power for something far more meaningful. Jack squeezed her hand, understanding her emotion. They'd built something remarkable together, a bridge between worlds that proved success and authenticity could coexist. As they walked home in the gathering dusk, the harbour lights twinkled like stars on the water. Their cottage, the same one where Sarah had hidden her identity so long ago, was now filled with photographs of their shared life. Fishing trips, community celebrations, quiet moments together. "Any regrets?" Jack asked softly. Sarah looked at her husband, at their town, at the life they'd built. "Only that I didn't crash my boat into your dock sooner." The sea breeze carried the sound of harbour bells, a sound that once represented Sarah's deception, but now rang with the truth they'd discovered together, that real wealth isn't found in bank accounts or boardrooms, but in the courage to be authentic, the strength to bridge differences, and the wisdom to know that love, in the end, is the greatest fortune of all. And as the sun set on another day in Millport, Sarah and Jack stood together at the edge of their worlds that had become one, proving that sometimes the richest lives are built not on what we have, but on who we become together. As she immerses herself in his humble world, she discovers something her fortune could never buy: pure, genuine kindness and a life stripped down to what truly matters. But when her true identity surfaces, will it bridge their worlds together, or prove that some gaps are too wide to cross?